Okay, so the weather said maybe 12% chance of rain. So if for some reason, if it's more than a 12% chance or something different, we are preparing a place over here that we can kind of shuffle to. But if it's just a little drizzle, hopefully it's not too bad. But I kind of suspect it's probably not really going to do anything. Yep. Did you guys get the downpour yesterday? Yeah. It was pretty. It was something. I was a little worried for my corn. My corn was almost sideways for a bit there from the wind. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Should we get started? A couple more minutes? I guess it is. We have a little more time before. Not sure whose coffee this is.
Do you want me to give you a signal at like 30 minutes in? So it's like halfway through the presentation?
Sure.
Okay.
Because we go 40-ish minutes, 45?
Hour
for the presentation if needed, and then a half hour for questions. Okay.
Anyone walking in? Should we go?
Sure.
Start? Okay.
Like, it is a little, I don't know, there's 2 minutes till 10:30. As far as like line, I don't know if that makes a difference. But.
And I went.
Okay, let's go ahead and at least do introductions.
Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. So thank you so much for everyone coming out. This is our citrus tree care class. My name is Emily. I'm the event coordinator. We are going to be live streaming the class, and we will post it afterwards as well. So if you need to go back and watch anything else, it'll be there for you. This is Todd. I'll have him do his intro, and we'll get going.
Okay. So yeah, my name is Todd Schweeder. I'm the diagnostic and customer service manager here. So if you have any plant questions or concerns or diagnosis of plant issues, or come chat with me in the main store over here. Got a degree in horticulture from BYU, Idaho. And been in the industry for almost 20-ish years. So yeah, I enjoy it. I like plants. Citrus, it's one of those things that's like, it's kind of straightforward, but at the same time, everyone seems to have questions about it. And every year we get a pretty good class show up for it, so we do it every year. But there's a little bit of technique and things like that. From a raise of hand, who has citrus trees? Okay. On a raise of hand, who has them only indoor, and who puts them out? Who has them just as an indoor house plant? Okay, everyone else puts them outside during. Okay, just curious on. Give me like 5 that's really successful. 1 you're having a lot of problems with your citrus. A 3 in there.
I just got it.
You just got it, so you don't know yet. Okay. Okay. Oh, you think it's doing good? Okay. How about 5? You having really good success? 3. Oh, 3-ish. Okay, so 3 plants. Okay. Okay. So citrus can be really fun, but obviously we're not California. We're not Florida. We're not that tropical climate, that warmer climate that they grow really well in. We are Utah, okay? And Utah is definitely a desert. So sometimes I'm on kind of, when it comes to citrus, I'm on a roller coaster. Okay, sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm only going to do it as a house plant because our Utah weather here is just too intense, too harsh. And so then I think, okay, I think my plant will do better if I only have it indoors. But then I kind of read things and I try things and I'm like, no, I think it really needs that outside weather. So then I put it outside for to kind of to get the sun and get the pollinators. And then I think, but then I run into problems with pests and heat, and I'm like, no, I'm never going to do this again. It never works that way. So then I just bring it indoors, and then I have so it's like I'm kind of like on this roller coaster trying to figure out maybe the best way of doing it in Utah. So we're going to go over both ways here today, and hopefully you can kind of determine what is best for your situation and whatnot, and we're going to go over what citrus need. Um, and so we're just going to kind of do the lecture, which is 45 minutes an hour, depending on how much it is. If you have some dire questions that you need to answer during that lecture, just raise your hand. Most likely we can answer it. But if you want to hold off to your questions to the end, that is fine too. And then we can just kind of do a Q&A at the end of the discussion of the class. So you should hopefully have your paper here. This is we try to kind of take all the information you can find on the internet and experience of different areas and kind of boiled it down to hopefully the most basics here. So this is definitely a kind of a boiled down reference guide for citrus. So hopefully you'll get a little bit more out of it as we go on. But we're just going to kind of use this a little bit as our the discussion to kind of move through. So citrus, like I said, a lot of them were actually native originally to Asia area. They have then been propagated and formed, and we have a lot of delicious varieties out there. Lemons, limes, oranges, tangerines, all of the above. I do find that if you are a beginner or if you don't have necessarily the ideal location for it, I do find like the more tart or sour varieties tend to be easier to grow versus the really sweet ones. The sweet ones take a lot more heat to kind of get the sugars formed and in the juices and things like that. So it is ideal, so just something to be aware of. So if you're wanting to give it a try, I would start more with the lime, the Meyer lemons, the Mexican limes, the kumquats. Those kind of more tart, kind of sour tend to do better. People like to grow them less for the fruit and more for the plant, just for the sake of having the plant. It can be a nice house plant in many ways. You don't necessarily need to get fruit. And something to kind of be aware with citrus, if you're from Utah, you're used to apples and peaches, and they have a very set schedule. They wake up in the spring, they bloom, and then during the summer they develop their fruit, and then you harvest sometime in summer or fall kind of thing. Citrus are a little different. They don't really have a set schedule. They can really bloom anytime. They can start developing that fruit anytime, and then they can harvest that fruit anytime. Now, typically, if you were like in California or somewhere that had more of a typical season, they do kind of have a time frame when they are more likely to bloom, and they have a time frame that they are more likely to produce fruit. But when we start bringing them indoor, outdoor, them around, sometimes that seasonality of the plant kind of gets off. And so there is a little bit of sometimes it's harder to predict exactly when it's going to bloom or when it's going to do what it wants. It sure seems like, at least with the citrus I've tried, I put it outside where I think, oh, it's going to bloom, it's going to get all this sunlight, it's going to do amazing. That's when it's going to fruit or flower, and then the bees can find it to pollinate it. And then it's not, and then it doesn't do anything. And then I bring it in for the winter because we get too cold here and it'll freeze. And it's like at that point when the plant's like, oh, new environment, it's changing, it's cooling off. That's when I'm going to put my flowers out. And then I have to hand pollinate it and go through all that. So citrus are sometimes finicky in Utah as far as the predictability of when they're going to fruit. And then the other thing I was going to, on that note, is fruit on citrus can take a while, okay? And if they don't get the right heat and the right sunlight, sometimes those fruit just sit there forever. And they don't seem to ever ripen or do anything. So they can take a while to get to the point where they're ready to pick. And sometimes it's hard to tell. We'll go over that here in a second. Like generally speaking, it's a heat and sun issue, I think, typically. In an indoor environment in Utah, usually it's just we're not getting it enough sun, or it's too cold, or things like that kind of trigger it into just kind of growing or just kind of maintaining itself. And so then it doesn't get the plant to switch over into reproduction mode. And that's the goal, is we're trying to say, hey, you got everything you need. You have the free reign to transition from being in this kind of hunkering down, preserving itself. You're good to transition into that flowering stage. But there's also, I think, other triggers as well. But that's the main one, I think, is just trying to make sure it's as healthy as it can be so it can allow itself to reproduce, essentially. So let's kind of start with container selection and transplanting. My general first, if you are a beginner or you're getting a new plant, I'm not a big fan of transplanting it. So if you were to buy something like this guy or these big 5 gallons, generally speaking, I say leave it in this pot. You can dress it up in a nicer pot by inserting it into a nicer pot, making it look nicer. But I'm not a big fan, at least at the first, when you first buy the plant, of transplanting it. When you buy a plant and you're moving it to your home or to your porch or a new environment, there's always going to be a little bit of stress on the plant because it has to adjust, switch, get familiar with the new light source that you might be providing it. And so I'm not a big fan of, on top of that stress, adding transplant shock. Okay, so my first, so if you're getting into it and you're buying a new plant, just leave it in the pot. Okay, usually you don't need to repot it until the roots are starting to get a bit more snug. Okay, you're trying to repot it before it gets to the point where it's like root bound. You don't want it root bound, but you, at the same time, I don't want to pot it up so soon that it's still loosey in the pot. So often you can, a lot of these usually, now sometimes you can get them from growers that maybe they've been sitting on them for a long time and maybe they are getting to that point of being root bound. But generally speaking, I usually find that they're usually fine. Let's see if I can pull this out. So you can kind of see there's some good root structure in there. There's some good, but I can see a lot of dirt. It's not like huge roots that are just really compact in there. So that's actually a pretty good general, like I think there's still a lot of good growth that this plant could potentially do in this pot. And so it's like, why add that extra stress on it? Just leave it in that pot, put it in a nice pot to kind of dress it up and call it good. And then when you start seeing those thicker roots in there, like obviously you don't want to wait too long, but you're trying to find that good balance there before potting it up. But that looked really healthy for me. I would assume you could get at least another year out of this pot, if not a few more years, before needing to necessarily pot it up to a bigger size. So that's just my first tip if you're getting a new plant, to kind of to not think you have to pot it up instantly, or if you're like, I have a nice pot, I want it to look nice.
So with the two different sizes there, would you go from that size to the 5 gallon, or would you go from...
Yeah, good question. So the question is potting, like when we do pot it up, what size do I go? My general rule is I like to just do the next size up. Okay, so this is what we call a number 1 or a 1 gallon. I would probably pot it up to a 2 or a 3 or 2 and just kind of do the next size up. And then when I need to pot it up again, do the next size up. Most plants, this is just general for plants in general, they don't like loosey-goosey soil in most cases, okay? And when you take a small root ball and you put it in a big pot, sometimes that often the plant is like, what do I do with this? And then they're kind of like in this weird limbo. So I usually like to just kind of do a pot up as I go. Now, if you took this and you potted it up to this size, you're probably fine to do so. But that's my general rule of thumb, is just do the next size up. But if you needed to pot it up in a bigger one, as long as it's not like, oh, I'm going in like a huge pot, I think you're probably fine doing that transition.
How does it compare to then just planting it outside?
So planting outside is usually in soil, not in a potting mix. So soil tends to be heavier, soil tends to be more tighter, and so it's just a little different kind of scenario there, where usually in containers you're not using like a heavy potting, like you're not using that heavy of a soil. So there's a little bit difference there, kind of thing. But you're right, it is kind of similar to that idea. But great question. Drainage is really important if you are potting it up. You want to make sure there's some really good drainage in that hole. Like this one doesn't even show really, but they have a really good mix in there. But we really want to make sure there's some good drainage. They have drainage all the way around it. So if you are getting like a new pot and you're planting it in a nicer pot, make sure it's good drainage. I read a lot of people recommend, and I would probably agree with this, terracotta pots. Terracotta don't have that glaze on them, and the nature of the clay that was used to make it tend to be a lot more porous. So it allows a lot more airflow and drainage in those pots versus like these nicer patio pots that have the glaze, and they tend to use a different kind of clay that tends to not be as porous. So something really porous can be helpful. Good drainage in the bottom. You don't want any standing water or catching any of the water at the bottom of that container. And I often recommend this is more preference, you can plant it in a nice pot, but I usually prefer planting it up in a plastic pot and then just inserting it. The reasons why I like that, one, if let's say you get some kind of ground termite or ants or something, if you have it outside in your soil, it's a lot easier to pull it out and kind of fix the problem when it's in a plastic pot than it is in like a nice ceramic pot or something like that. That just adds more weight and it's harder. And then if you do need to transplant it, sometimes you just have to break the pot in order to get it out, where you can more easily cut off a plastic pot than breaking a ceramic pot to get it out if you needed to repot it or deal with it with a problem like that. So I like to leave it in plastic and then just dress it up, put some nice clothes on it by putting it in a pot. Lighting and so location requirement. A few things. We're going to talk about lighting and temperature, because those are two somewhat important things. We didn't really put temperature on this list, but I'm going to add it in here. But so first of all, they need light. Okay, if they do not get enough light, they are going to struggle. They might grow, but they're definitely not going to flower if they're not getting enough light, kind of thing. But if they get not enough light, then they might even struggle to grow as well. So our paper here says 6 to 8 hours, which is what, when you read any label on on any plant, if it says needs full sun doesn't mean 24 hours of sun. It just means 6 to 8 hours of sun. And so these plants definitely need what we call full sun, 6 to 8 hours. But I would even say citrus would do better up to 12 hours of sun. Okay, so they really like sun. Now, we are Utah, so our sun here does tend to be higher UV index, really intense, especially in the afternoon sun. So use judgment there. Like 12 hours of morning sun to like noon or 1 or 2 is definitely different from like sun from 10 in the morning till the sun goes down at night, kind of thing. That afternoon sun is a lot more intense, but they do like a lot of sun. However, their ideal temperature zone is around 65 degrees Fahrenheit to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, we're Utah, we get up into those 90, 95, like this end of this weekend, we're going to have like 4 or 5 days in a row in the hundreds. Will that kill them? No, but that's not their ideal range, and sometimes that can add stress. And then if they're getting that afternoon hot sun, like if you put it outside on your porch and they're getting that hot afternoon sun, you could very well burn the leaves or have stresses like that. So trying to find that good balance of morning sun, but a lot of direct sun, but then maybe more shaded in the afternoon. We do sell things kind of like these shade fabrics. So if you're like, oh, I don't have I'm more on the other side of the house where it gets the afternoon sun, but I really want to try citrus outside, then possibly something like this might be a really good option to kind of help it, give it a little bit of reprieve from the sun. I think this is a 30%. Yeah, we have 50% as well. Depending on how intense your sun is, maybe something a little more shady might be helpful.
Wintertime, grow light.
Yes, yes, and I was going to get to that. I was going to get to that here in a second, because that's one argument for why you put it outside, is because they like the heat, they like the temperature, and but sometimes we get and they like the sun. But on the flip side, if you only have it indoors, you have a little bit better control. You keep it around that 65, 70 degree, like 65 seems cool on my end. So in my house, it's usually around 75 is what I put art. And that tends to be a really good zone for citrus. Granted, you don't want it by they hate quick fluctuation. So you wouldn't want it by a vent or by like a door during the winter. If it opens and blows through, and that could really shock them. And on the same note, a heat stress, like if you all of a sudden open up a door and light shines in and you're moving furniture or something and it's open for a long time, there could be some extra stresses it's not used to. So you want to try to find a good place, a good window that has that good sun. So those are some maybe arguments for indoor or outdoor, because sometimes we get really hot. They would like that little cooler temperature maybe during the day. However, they do like about a 5 to 10 degree drop during the night. So sometimes maybe a potential problem for our indoor environment is that consistent, like your AC's always on, keeping that temperature always at the right. They do, like, ideally, if you were to assimilate their normal environment, you would want it to kind of cool off a little bit during the night and then warm up during the day and kind of stay within that 65 to 85 temperature range kind of idea. But temperature is really good. The temperature, it's the heat, it's the warmer temperatures that actually help with getting the sugars in your fruit to develop and for ripening purposes. And so if you have a fruit that's not ripening well and just sitting on the tree, it might, maybe if it's an indoor environment, maybe we're just keeping it too regular or things like that. So the heat could maybe be a potential problem, like maybe we're keeping it too cool or things like that. So heat is really important for ripening and sugar development in the fruit. And that's why some of the sweet, like sweet oranges, and those ones are harder to grow in a Utah home environment, just because that, like, we bring it in and so it's just harder to maybe to get that consistently. But those are a few lights. As far as indoor, yes, LED light. If you have an indoor environment or you're keeping it an indoor strictly houseplant, then LED lights may be needed to supplement it with some good full spectrum LED growing lights. Again, you're trying to get that 6, 8, up to 12 kind of hours of sun. So if you have a good window in the morning, but then it only gives you like 3-4 hours of sun before the sun kind of comes around, then you'll probably need some kind of light source to help it if you're doing it in an indoor environment. So those are some tips and tricks there. Watering requirements, I would say, like most houseplants, and I kind of categorize citrus as a houseplant, even if you put it outside, just the nature of Utah. The number one killer is overwatering. Okay?
I'm guilty.
You're guilty of that?
So what I ended up doing is buying a thermometer that tells me how much my dirt is.
Yeah. So you can get like a water meter, things like that to kind of help. Those are a lot of little tools out there. I usually just use my finger and stick it in the soil instead of getting a thermometer. But the number one problem is overwatering, and then this is kind of combination to that, a soil mix that is too heavy or too compacted or has too much peat moss in it or something that holds that moisture, and so it doesn't drain well. So we definitely want to be careful on the watering. They do like to dry out fairly well. Not a cactus, it's not like that dry out, but you do want the wait for the top 2 to 3 inches of that soil to dry out, fairly dry, before watering it. So you're not necessarily waiting for the whole thing to dry out, but you do want to, so I just usually stick my finger in there to the second knuckle or in, and I kind of feel it. That had a little moisture. I could probably wait on watering that based on what I just felt there. So you definitely want to wait to let it definitely get a little bit more dry between watering. Do not leave it in standing water. So if you are on a patio and you're trying to prevent water stains, or if you're indoor and you have it in a pot and that collects water or something like that, if you do, make sure you go and dump that water or siphon that water off or something like that, because you do not want those roots to sit in water. That could definitely, again, kill it. And then citrus like humidity. So today is a great day for them. Okay, but in an indoor environment, first of all, we're Utah, so we're pretty dry. And if it's in an indoor environment, our indoor environments are often even drier than our outdoor environments due to AC and things like that. And during the winter, you have like your dry heat from your furnace and whatnot. So there's a lot of heat, and so our indoor environment tend to be a lot more drier. So if you're doing it indoors or during the winter, if you bring it indoors, make sure you can either mist it. Sometimes I'm a little hesitant to mist, just because that can also introduce other problems like diseases and that direct water on the leaves. But misting can helpful. Make sure you get a really fine mist, ideally, so it gets more in the air instead of on the leaves. You could do like a bay of rocks around the bottom, and kind of fill it up. Not so much that it's sitting in the soil, so it's not like keeping the soil wet, but it's like you have a tray, you have rocks in that tray, and then the plant's on top of the rocks. And then you fill it up, and then that will evaporate, and you'll create like a dome of higher humidity around that plant. If you are a houseplant fanatic like myself, then you can kind of gather your plants together or put them in the same area, and then they tend to help each other trap in that humidity as you water your plants. So gathering plants together can also be a helpful versus having one in each corner of the room kind of thing. So those are maybe some tips and tricks to try to bring up that humidity to help the plant. If it's outside, misting and doing the same things can also be helpful, even in an outside environment like on a deck or patio, to try to bring up that humidity. We're an arid desert here, so kind of maybe misting it occasionally can be helpful, or the rock, the stuff. So those are kind of watering. Now soil, like I said, if your soil is too heavy, you're gonna end up having more water problems, and water can kill, is the #1 problem for death for citrus. So you want to make sure you have a really good drainage. You can get online and you can buy mixes that are specifically designed for citrus. We don't, here at Glover Nursery, don't sell anything specifically for citrus, but we do sell some really good mixes here. This is actually a local company called Circle Soil. They try to source almost all their product out of Utah or the surrounding area, but this is their breathable mix. So things that are like breathable mix, it's more chunky, has more bark, has more, they have a lot of like volcanic minerals and biochar and things like that in it. So this one is a really good fine mix in it. This is another company that we've worked with a little bit. Again, more of the pumice and really fine mixes. So I think something like this would be good. Sometimes people like to get cactus mixes or succulent mixes and kind of use those as well, even though they're designed more for succulents or cacti. They still kind of have that same benefit of something that dries out more easily and doesn't retain a lot of moisture and whatnot. So those kind of mixes can be really helpful if you do get to the point you need to pot up or redo something like that. Obviously, when we get them from the growers, they usually have a really good mix, a lot of bark in it and whatnot. But if you get online, you can find so many opinions about soils. Okay, so find one that you like and follow it. That's kind of that's probably my suggestion. But generally speaking, you just want something good drainage, holds a little bit of moisture. You don't want to go so arid that it dries out super fast, but you don't want it to hold that moisture. You do want that top few inches to dry out pretty consistently, so you can kind of get on a scheduling, a water schedule. So the question is if I was to make my own mix, what would I mix it? If you look on our paper here, we do kind of, usually it's like a combination of compost, coco coir, peat moss, and perlite and vermiculite are usually the main things. Now, vermiculite tends to hold in a lot of moisture, but it drains really well. Okay, so I tend to do less of the vermiculite, if any. Kind of depends on what my base mix is starting. And then I tend to do more coco coir than peat moss, because I find coco coir tends to not hold that moisture as well, but peat moss can come aerobic over a while if you let it dry out too much. And then the compost, I definitely like to do more of a barky compost, like pine fines or things like that. I try to mix it in with more of a barky compost so there's good drainage. Again, this is a potting mix, so there's no like heavy soils. I'm not using like our Utah topsoil or anything like that in these mixes. Something that drains really well and whatnot. Sand would be fine. Sand, I just find it washes out too easily. So I'm just not a big, I just don't usually do sand in that regard. And actually sand, if you think of like a sandy beach, they're kind of like a sponge. It doesn't hold it long. It dries out really fast, but it actually kind of sometimes hold moisture in almost too well at the time of watering. But so charcoal is fine. Yep, charcoal kind of fits into that bark kind of category, that compost category. Fertilizing. Citrus are heavy feeders. Okay, if you want it to bloom well, if you want it to get good fruit or bigger fruit, if it is blooming consistently, you'll definitely need to give it some fertilizer. Okay, and generally speaking, you want to fertilize it when it's in its growing stage. Typically, I would say that's ideally around April to September, August, September. But like I said, sometimes in our Utah environment, when you bring it, like sometimes it like tricks the plant. Like we have our heat on, we warm up our homes, it feels more of a dry heat. And so like, and then you have your AC on during the spring and the summer. And so if it's only an indoor plant, your plant might kind of be on the opposite schedule, depending on how cold you make your home and how warm it gets during the winter. And so sometimes if it's just an indoor environment, your growing season might be more during the winter, but then there's less good quality light. So then you'd have to make sure you give it like some good alternative light from a LED light or something. But so just sometimes you like citrus, when you do them indoors, can kind of throw it off. That's maybe a pro for doing it outside, because it kind of, you're using your natural climate to kind of help dictate the plant's life cycle and whatnot. But fertilizing is really important, and normally you want to do it when it's actively growing is when you want to heavy fertilize, and you want to pull back substantially and maybe completely on the off season when the plant isn't actively growing. In our notes, we recommend a 2-1-1 or a 3-1-1. Now that is the ratio. So for example, I have let me find, oh, here it is. Fish emulsion fertilizer. It's a 5-1-1. So it's a little off, but that's pretty darn close. So you'd be fine with something kind of like this, would be really good. But also, citrus they are really adaptive to your pH levels, but they would probably prefer being a little bit more on the acidic side. So you could look at something like this, and this is 31-11-11, so 30-10-10 essentially. If you do the math, that's a 3-1-1, okay? So this would also maybe be a really good option. Because it's such a high number, I would probably half it. So instead of doing the full recommendation on the back, I would half the recommendation. So if it said a tablespoon to a half tablespoon per gallon or whatever it says on the back. But again, that's just the ratio. That's pretty much the same thing as a 3-1-1. It's just in higher numbers. So, and this would help acidify your soil. So you could maybe look into bringing that pH down. If you are doing it in a container, these containers usually hold a neutral-ish pH naturally. And so it's not necessarily needed to bring the pH down, but it could be helpful if you wanted to try that. And half of gardening is experimenting and figuring out what works for you. So if you're like, hey, I've tried this, and I still aren't getting any fruit or flowers, oh, let's maybe try bring that pH down and see if that helps. So you could that might be a solution. Root stimulator, not a 3-1-1, but if you're ever transplanting, always a good option. But generally speaking, they're heavy feeders, especially during the growing season.
Every watering?
You would have to maybe look at the label, because it depends on the label. So if the label recommends, of the fertilizer recommends every watering, then I would do every watering. If the label recommends every 3 months, then I would just do it every 3 months, kind of like this citrus. This is a fruit citrus and berry, has citrus in the name. It's one of the few fertilizers that actually says citrus that we sell here. And again, it's a 6-4-2. So it's a little different than the 3-1-1 or 2-1-1, but it's it's a low number. You're going to be fine. But they recommend, I think, every 3-ish months, according to this one, because it's a granular. It's not a liquid fertilizer. So again, there's a little bit of trial and error. There's a little bit of using good judgment. The plant looks healthy. Do I really want to put more fertilizer on it? So it's kind of, you're trying to gauge that, trying to talk with your plants, become a plant whisperer, try to understand what it wants and what it doesn't want. And that just comes with time and experience. And I'm still working on that with my citrus, but that could potentially, those are some options maybe to kind of help your plant, but they are heavy feeders if you want to get good fruit out of them though. Any other, I think I covered everything I needed about citrus. And like I said, use a root stimulator. If at any time if you do transplant it, definitely get something like a root stimulator or even something like seaweed extract. So this is a 0.10, 0.44. So it's very little in nutrients, but seaweed also kind of helps with general immunity of the plant. And so when it's in a stressful situation like transplant, or it's sick or it has a disease, sometimes doing something like a seaweed extract isn't a heavy feeder, but it has other benefits to kind of help boost the immune system of the plant, essentially, to kind of help it get through things. So some things like that or root stimulator are really good options for stressed plants to kind of give them a little bit of a boost and help that root system get more established. And then let's skip alchemizing for a little bit. We talked about varieties. Okay. We're going to talk about pollination. And then we're going to talk about alchemizing if you decide to put it outside. So pollination. So one of the benefits putting your plant outside during the summer is assuming that it blooms and it has a lot of blooms on it. The bees will do this job for you, or the pollinators out there will pollinate the fruit, because citrus do need to be pollinated to grow, but they are what we call self-pollinating, meaning the plant has both male and female flower parts on the same flower. It's a true flower, or a complete flower, I think is the terminology, complete flower. And so you have, if you're not attracting bees or bees and pollinators, or if you are indoors and you don't have bees and pollinators inside your home to do this work for you, which usually is the case, then you would need to pollinate it yourself. And pretty much what you want to find is this big yellow part right in the middle. That's the female area, and then all these little stamens, right? I got the right, or anthers. My brain all of a sudden just went. No, anthers. Yeah, stamen. Anthers are the part on the top. Just getting my terminology wrong. So it is the stamen. The anthers are the where the pollen is. Okay, and that's the male production part. So you kind of pretty much on these flowers, it looks like most of the pollen is already kind of gone away. So this won't really do much in this case, but pretty much you want to kind of take a brush. I usually like a soft brush versus like a Q-tip. I find Q-tips tend to just smash instead of collecting the pollen, but kind of like gather that pollen. Now, it can pollinate the same stigma. My brain is not working right now, right? Yeah, stigma. It can pollinate the same one, but I usually like to kind of take pollen from this one and kind of act like a bee and do the stigma of this one, and get the pollen from this one and do the stigma of this one, and kind of gather some of that pollen and do this stigma. And I kind of like to bounce around as if I'm like a bee, just to kind of simulate nature there. and kind of get that pollen and get it. Now, often, like I said, this I can already see that the pollen is all dried up and gone on these, so this isn't really doing much. But often it'll be bright yellow and kind of like a bee butt. You'll see like it gathering on the tip of your brush if you have a lot of pollen. So often you can actually see it on your brush, and you can kind of go like that, and then you can make sure you're like, okay, that's where the pollen is. Let me make sure I kind of like scrape it off on the female part to kind of get that pollen all over it. So if you need, and that's the same, this is the same way if you need to pollinate your vegetables in your garden, if you're not attracting bees to your squash or to your cucumbers or like any of those that have the big flowers. Again, now, unlike this one that have a complete flower, male and female parts on the same one, something kind of like most squashes have male flowers and then they have a female flower. So you have to kind of find which one is which and go between them. But that's the same concept, okay? So, but that's pretty much what you do. So if you are trying to only do indoor and you're not putting it outside or bringing it inside and doing that transition, then you will need to self-pollinate it if you have a desire to get fruit. But you do have to find the right time. Obviously, some of these flowers have already dropped. You can kind of see, I don't know if these got pollinated or not, but that green part, that is what turns into the fruit as it develops. Now, if this fruit got pollinated, then hopefully that will start to further develop. But if bees didn't find it, then this will just naturally drop off itself, kind of idea. But that's what that is the part, that's the ovary essentially, and that is what is is getting fertilized by the pollen to turn into the fruit. So those are that is how you do it. So alchemizing your plant, because you only need to pollinate, hopefully, if you leave it indoors. If you put it outdoors, hopefully, bees are finding and things. But there is some complications for bringing out, because there's 2 times you'd have to take it out. There's 2 times you're doing the transition, in the spring and and before winter, in the fall. In the spring, when you are transitioning it out, it is getting used to your consistent temperature of your home. It's getting used to maybe a not as intense light source, because it's just getting the light through the window. And then maybe if you have an LED light, it's definitely not comparable to the sun. Okay, it doesn't have all those harsh UV lights that are attacking those leaves. So there is a time frame that you have to transition from an indoor environment to an outdoor environment. I usually say give yourself a few weeks to properly do it, not try to do it in like one day, and one day you're just going to end up burning your plant, kind of thing. But things to keep in mind is temperature. Okay, like maybe let's take it outside, like, oh, it's starting to warm up, we're above that 65-degree range, but it still could maybe tip down really cold at night. So I don't want to leave it outside the whole time, but maybe shuffle it outside, let it sit in a cooler temperature for a few hours, and then bring it indoors at night, and then maybe put it out a little bit longer. And as we get beyond that potential of a late frost, then maybe you could kind of put it outside, but put it more in a shady location first, and then put it in an area that's maybe a little bit more dappled sun, so the suns are kind of shining through the leaves, but it's not that direct sun. And then slowly kind of transition it to a more of a full sun location where it gets that 6 to 8 to 12 hours of sun. But again, our afternoon sun is really intense. So always be careful with our hot afternoon sun here in Utah. But so you need to kind of do that transition there. And then on the flip side, in the winter, a few weeks before our last frost date. Now, when is our last frost date? That's going to maybe be hard to know exactly, but ideally, you want to try to bring it in before our first frost, not last frost, our first frost of winter. And kind of do that same transition. Now, because you're going from maybe a more intense environment to an indoor environment, that transition will hopefully be maybe not as stressful or as potentially strainful. But if you go from a really light environment to a really shady indoor environment with just an LED light, you're still going to shock it. So you still need to kind of do a little bit of that same kind of transition of getting it used to your indoor environment. The other thing I would recommend when transitioning it from an outdoor environment into an indoor environment would be maybe doing some kind of horticulture oil spray or triple action, which is mostly neem oil with a little bit of chemical or organic chemicals in it. Spinosad soap, something with a soap might be really good. These are all organic options that so you're not bringing chemicals into your home. But if you've had your citrus tree out on your patio all summer, all and most of fall and spring, like most likely bugs have found your plant. Okay. And typically in Utah, like let's say aphids, for example, let's say aphids found your citrus tree and there's predators. It never got out of control. It's fine, but there's a few aphids on it. You bring it indoors, you do this transition, you bring it indoor. Normally winter would hit and keep that aphid population under control. But because you just brought it in, you have extended that season for that aphid for all winter, essentially. And now all of a sudden that aphid that would have normally died has time to start reproducing and getting out of control. But you don't have other bugs inside your home to kind of control the pest. Okay, you don't have those beneficial insects out there that are flying in and eating and flying away kind of thing. You kind of kept those out, but some of those aphids you didn't catch and they got in kind of thing. And then that pest has time to reproduce and their threshold gets to a point where then it starts to be a problem and then your plant starts to suffer. And that could be for aphids. I would say scale and mites are more of a problem for tomato or for citrus trees. Mealybugs is a really common problem because they don't go through a winter and die back, and that's a major problem for houseplants in general. So I like to do a pre-treatment of my trees if I'm bringing them in, just to try to kind of kill off anything that might be coming inside the house.
What about treating the soil?
Yeah, soil treatment can be good as well. The problem with soil treatment is most of these organic options are more or less contact kill. So depending on the pest that you're potentially worried about in the soil, you may need to do something more chemical based that has a residual. So as the bugs go in and out of the soil, they kind of go through that barrier. So something like 7 and things like that might do a little better. This one does have something called pyrethrins, which is a natural chemical made from chrysanthemums. And that one does have a little bit of residual, so you could maybe try this one. But depending on the pest. Now, I don't have them out here, but I do sell nematodes, beneficial nematodes that are great for soil treatments. So if you have a history with a plant with some kind of soil problem, such as mites or the fungus gnats or things like that, then the beneficial nematodes are really nice because they're an actual predator. They're a living thing that they go and find the larva and kill the larva of things like fungus gnats and whatnot. I do have something else called mosquito bits that is a beneficial bacteria that is also supposed to be good against fungus gnats, but that would only do fungus gnats, where the nematodes would also do other potential predators or pests in your soil that might have maybe found your soil while it was outside potentially. So there are maybe some beneficials you could try if you do continually have some kind of soil problem with your citrus or houseplants.
Well, I just finished up about a year battle with fungus gnats.
Oh no.
And so I'm a little paranoid every time I bring a new plant
Yes.
or something from outside.
Yep. And that's kind of what I was talking about, my battle, my roller coaster of indoor. Do I leave my citrus indoor all the time, or do I put it outside? Because I've also had that problem where, because it was outside, the gnats found it, and then they've claimed a home, and then I bring it in, and then I extend that season for them, and then they get really out of control. And that's kind of my roller coaster. I'm like, do I only have it as an indoor plant, or do I put it outside? Because citrus like the heat, they like the warmth, but I keep getting those pests when I bring them in. And so that's kind of that battle there of like, what is ideal for your situation and your home. If you have a really good place indoors with really good light, maybe it's worth avoiding that risk of getting fungus gnats or things like that from putting it outside, and just having it indoor and just doing and pollinating it yourself, kind of thing. So
while you've been talking, I started growing citrus last summer,
okay.
and then I brought them indoors during the winter, and then I took them back outside this late spring. And in thinking about it, they really did a lot better just indoors.
Yeah.
Than they're doing outside.
Yeah, and that's why I'm kind of where I'm on my roller coaster. I'm more on the side of keeping them indoor because kind of that's been my experience. But I've also seen some people have really good experience. But we are a desert, and we get super hot here, and sometimes I do find that heat tends to be really intense on them. So, and that's why I go back and forth. But yeah.
I did a very drastic thing last year. Any plant that I had outside, I repotted them, took all the dirt, most of the dirt off, brought them in, and then used apple cider vinegar or whatever to keep them in.
Yeah.
That worked, and I didn't lose any plants, but it was like, oh.
Beneficial nematodes. I've had really good success with them so far. I think they're an actual living thing. So they go out and hunt for their food. And so it's not just like, oh, I put a bacteria on like the mosquito bits, and hopefully it washed over the larvas, and then the bacteria hopefully killed those larvas. I do like the nematodes actually go hunt, and they will live about 2 years in the soil. And if you have really good organic matter in your soil, it may reproduce itself and last longer, but it should last about 2-ish years in your soil. And so that's a long time period of control. Now, is it like a guarantee? Obviously, no, there's always things that I can't control for and whatnot. But I think beneficial nematodes are a really good solution for fungus gnats if that's a problem that you're getting with houseplants or with citrus. So I really like those. I think they're pretty nifty. So, but yeah, so things to maybe try. Half of gardening, like I said, is just experimenting. Oh, I heard this. Let's try that. Let's see if that works, kind of thing. So, but as far as pests goes, like I said, I do like to do that. At least some kind of foliar treatment. And then if you could maybe do a soil treatment. Soil treatments are just a little harder to do. The main ones, like I said, is the nematodes or the mosquito bits, which I don't think I brought out here because I didn't think about that problem when I was setting this up. But those I think are really good options for if you want to do a soil treatment. And then you could do maybe more of a chemical insecticide, because that actually creates a little bit more of a barrier on that soil that might help treat things from getting out of control when you bring it indoor. But yeah, those are options. The last thing, like it says, most citrus will begin producing fruit in spring and ripen in late fall or winter. But when you bring it indoor, it can throw that off. So trying to judge your plant and what it thinks is spring and what it thinks is winter and fall. And then different varieties will ripen at different times. Like I said, some take a lot of heat to ripen, some take forever to ripen. I do find limes tend to ripen more quick, or limes tend to ripen more quickly and things like that. So you could kind of look into those. Pruning. When it comes to pruning, again, if you're from Utah and you're used to the kind of fruit trees we have around here, they have a very predictable, they grow on a spur, like an apple grows on a spur, or peaches and nectarines grow on the new wood. Citrus don't really have any, like, they can really grow on any part of the wood, old or new. They just, like, if they're ready to go, if they get into production mode, they'll usually grow. Now, often you'll see them usually grow on the younger tips kind of area. So they're going to more likely put fruit on the tips than like down in the older wood. But they're not necessarily, you don't have to prune in a way to get the right kind of wood or the right kind of situation. They'll just produce if they feel inclined to produce, and they'll flower. So normally when it comes to pruning, it's more pruning for like the shape and making sure that you have good branch structure, that you don't have like weird crossing, so it has like and then thicker branches, so if it does start producing fruit, it has the support needed to support that fruit. So it's a little bit kind of, you can kind of see it looks like the growers, I'd say that's a bad prune. I would have pruned it further down, but they're trying to produce it more like kind of more of a V shape, more structure appropriate. Make sure you have some good bends. You don't want anything too tight because that's a weak union between branches. Ideally, you want a 45 to 90 degree angle. So as you're pruning, you're just more or less pruning for the shape and structure and less for certain reasons to try to get it to fruit.
Another mistake. I tried to do a topiary
Oh.
just because I thought I would be cool.
I would say it is possible to topiary if you like to do some fun things, but it would be, I would think that would be more viable, not in a pot setting, more in like a home setting where you can allow it to get big, because anything can be technically topiaried. But I would assume that would be harder with a small plant in a small container to get it to thicken up enough to make it look like a shape. But yeah, but that's fun. Like, like I said, gardening is just experimenting, just going for it, having some fun, things like that. So that is pretty much what I have. Let's open it up to questions.
Water sprouts.
Water sprouts.
Yeah, what are they? How can I tell if it's a water sprout?
Water sprouts are mostly like, I'll relate it to like a water sprout is anything that just kind of shoots straight up. Okay, so if I have like, if all of a sudden it just shoots straight up like a weird branch or something, that is considered a water sprout. Okay, now you could say, well, I don't mind where that water sprout's growing. Let me prune it and I'll branch it out and I'll just make it part of the plant. You could then make it into part of the plant. But if you're like, if you already have a good structure and you're getting these weird shoots up that are just kind of going crazy, then those are maybe ones that you want to prune out so that it's not compromising your shape and structure that you've taken time to develop and prune. Does that make sense?
And then real quick, I'm just going to stop our live and then I'll have some announcements. So if you're watching at home, if you have any questions, just contact our diagnostics department and then check out any upcoming classes on our Eventbrite. And then